Today is a day like any other day. Today is business as usual. Today is normal. Until it's not. Then it's a day when seconds make all the difference. When communications and coordinations must be clear and quick. When keeping people from harm, maintaining continuity, and protecting assets hangs in the balance. When shaving seconds could keep employees safer in a natural disaster. Or tens of thousands could be saved every minute by keeping businesses up and running. When more lives are protected when facing an active shooter. When trauma victims can be reached and treated faster. And first responders can organize evacuations better. The Everbridge Critical Event Management Platform delivers organizational resilience on an unprecedented scale, combining real-time monitoring, situational awareness, and integrated response across the enterprise for a common operating view. We hope a day like this never comes. And yet it's a day we prepare for every day at Everbridge. Keeping people safe, assets protected, and businesses running. Returning to normal on a day that turns out to be anything but.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Harrington. I'm an analyst on the Public Policy Insights team at Economist Impact. We welcome you today to our discussion on rebuilding business travel resilience. The Global Business Travel Association predicts a 42% increase in business travel spending in the US this year compared to 2021. And on today's discussion, we're going to first talk about these business travel trends, seeing the increasing changes that are soon to come, and then talk about how to rebuild business travel resilience, touching on topics such as the new duty of care, travel risk management, and how to build corporate travel policies that suit this new age of business travel. This event has been programmed by Economist Impact, and we want to thank Everbridge for sponsoring this event. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists, and I'll start by turning it over to them to introduce themselves. So Miriam, I think you're the first on my screen here, so if you want to start off, and then we'll pass to Tracy and Mike for the introductions.
Hi, my name is Miriam Moskovich. I lead partnerships and research at BCD Travel, and thanks, Tracy, for making this possible for us today with Everbridge.
Yeah, you bet, Miriam. I'm Tracy Reinhold. I am the Chief Security Officer at Everbridge. And in that capacity, I am responsible for all of our security strategy globally, which includes travel risk management. Mike?
I'm Mike Davidson. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Maupin Hess Travel, a travel management company based in the U.S.
Great, thank you all. And to start us off with such a great panel of experts, I'd love to hear your take on what business travel trends you're closely monitoring. Of course, we're increasingly aware of how workplaces and working trends have changed since the pandemic. But from your view, how has corporate travel changed? And perhaps we'll do the same loop around, start it with Miriam, and then to Tracy and Mike for this question.
Well, I think that one of the things that we're watching with business travel right now in terms of trends, right, is the changing behavior of the traveler, right? So today we find that many companies are still struggling to bring travelers or employees back into their offices. And so we still have quite a bit of business travelers who are now no longer reporting into an office. And many of them have even left their office location and changed where they live. And so there's a whole new group of business travelers who are now remote workers. And that's been a huge change, I think, for business travel programs to react to and change up their services and how they communicate to their employees to make sure that their business travel goes off without a hitch. I think there is another issue now that in particular in this time of year is really important to business travel programs, and that is the economic uncertainty going on in the world right now. This time of year is when many corporate travel programs are renegotiating their agreements with all of their suppliers. And it's very difficult to forecast what business travel is going to look like in the next few years. There's a lot of uncertainty with economy, with fuel prices, with geopolitical issues. We are likely in or headed into a recession potentially. So business leaders that determine their strategy as it relates to business travel are very much looking at what are the economic trends that are going to affect their business and how that might affect their spending in business travel. So I would say the mix of employees starting to work from anywhere and being more virtual, combined with some of the economic uncertainties that companies are facing, is really changing the way folks are looking at corporate travel and how they're prioritizing business trips.
Good. Interesting concepts. One of the things that I've noticed, and obviously if you go to any airport today, you will see that there are a ton of people traveling. And I will tell you that one of the things that is becoming very relevant is constant communications and connectivity. The ability to not only anticipate where travelers are going to go, but also to use risk intelligence to determine potential disruptions to that travel, that the traveler is going to want to know in real time or near real time so that they can make adjustments. There's an expectation for travelers today that exceeds what was existing pre-pandemic. Those that were, for lack of a better term, road warriors in 2019 are back in the novice category. So some of the things that they took for granted before, they have forgotten. And to Miriam's point, the world is very complex. Not only is there geopolitical instability, there's also some potential disruptions to the airline industry that could manifest before Christmas. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration when you are thinking about your employees and how you protect them while they are in travel status. So Mike, I'm curious on what your thoughts are on that as well.
Thanks, Tracy. I think you said that really, really well. We're noticing more than ever the travel disruption being a big part of a business traveler's day. So as you mentioned, the road warrior who used to, be able to do everything themselves, or so they thought, we're able to really need to look at what happens today. So I did something I didn't think I'd ever do, but 2 months ago started a whole new department where we employ advisors just to watch our travelers that are traveling today. So anything that could potentially disrupt their journey, we're trying to catch in advance, and mostly we reach out via text. That seems to be customers' way they react best and interact best. So we're trying to look at misconnections. I mean, it definitely rolls into duty of care, but it's a big deal to have dedicated people to it, because now we're watching in advance strikes, like you mentioned, anything that could disrupt travel today. The other side of it too is now you've got, as Miriam mentioned earlier, there's no office anymore in a lot of cases where you're going to meet somebody. So now restaurants, we've had to come up with some unique circumstances where we get clients together when business travelers used to just always travel and go to an office. So it's a big change.
Hey, Mike, let me just add a little something on there about risk intelligence, which you touched on. And so part of the complexity of today's world is sort of exacerbated by the instant availability of information. And sometimes that information is not always accurate. So having a good risk intelligence process for travelers is important. So verifying the veracity of that intelligence before you disseminate it to your travelers is important. And it is an art. And it's a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and human analysts who give it that final scrub before you send it to your travelers. Because I think there is an expectation of travelers that their corporate entities will advise them of potential disruptions and or dangers while they travel. And I think that we all have that responsibility. I know we have it here at Everbridge. We do that for our own travelers and for the travelers of our customers. So I think that the aggregation, deconfliction of intelligence, and then the consistent messaging to the traveler, which you'd mentioned, is really, really important.
Yeah,
I'd like to add just a couple more things around general trends. One of the big trends that many program managers, client travel managers, business leaders are thinking about, top of mind right now, is sustainability, right? So we all saw the photos in the last few years of when travel completely stopped, right? Flowers started growing in places they never grew before. We started to take a really strong look at sustainability in general. And we also know that many leading companies have subscribed to sustainability goals. And so now, as we look at really starting to put business travelers back on the road in great capacity, most companies are looking at ways to make sure that they return to travel in ways that are sensible and make sense and are very cognizant of their environmental impact. So that's a topic that has been coming up quite a bit. And continues to drive the way corporations are looking at how they put together their travel programs, top of mind. And we are beyond just reporting on it. We are now at the stage where business travelers are beginning to consider sustainability options when they're purchasing travel, and corporations are actually buying sustainable aviation fuel. They're offsetting carbon at the point of sale. And so this new trend is also very much influencing the way they're putting travel programs together. And finally, there's the issue of purposeful travel, right? So when corporations are thinking about, well, how do we come back out of this pandemic? How do our policies change? How does the sensibility around how we decide to travel or not travel, or the nature of our travel? There's really a new vision of looking at purposeful travel, really reconsidering, this isn't 2018 or 2019 where you had a meeting and you said, forget it, I'm just going to get on a flight and I'll see you tomorrow. Now they're really starting to consider, how is this trip going to enhance my business? How is this going to address my goals as a company? Is this the right ratio for travel? Are these the right people to travel? Is this the right purpose of travel? And so we see many travel programs starting to think about how their policy and their process around their program, travelers make really good decisions about what trips to take and what to take virtual.
These are some really excellent points, and really reiterates, Tracy, I think your point about the complexities that all of which have to be considered when you're considering business travel. So in light of the questions of economic uncertainties that you had mentioned, Miriam, and this new age of complexities, the need for more instant data, and the sustainability questions, how quickly are companies responding to these challenges, while there's also this increasing recovery in business travel? So the two factors of having to consider all these new complexities on top of seeing an explosion in business travel. And Mike, I think you had a great example as well when you talked about building out a new department and having to move quite quickly to respond to all these challenges. But I'd love to hear from you all to hear how companies are responding to this multitude of challenges and how they're doing it in such rapid fire in real time.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start if that's okay. Carrying on a little bit further to that idea, and Miriam, I'm so glad you brought up sustainability and that being such a big issue right now, because it is. And one of the things we've learned really the last 6 or 7 months has been, you get somebody that has found the value in taking the trip. So they're going to take the trip, they've got a connection, let's say in Atlanta, but then they miss their connection and they're stuck. And maybe we can't get them on the next flight or a flight within a few days. So then they just come home. So now in their eyes, they've wasted a trip and there just aren't as many options available. So on a very simplistic level, that's what this department is trying to solve is, okay, if there's only 3 seats available on the next flight, can we grab one of them for our traveler, make sure they get to their destination, things like that. So it can be very basic or it can be very broad in terms of what we're trying to do.
Mike, I think, and Miriam brought it up first, ESG is becoming a huge issue corporately, right? So customers will vote with their feet. They will gravitate towards organizations that are environmentally and socially, and have a governance structure that allows them to be compliant. We had COP26 last year, COP27 this year in Egypt. All of this is gaining momentum. So I think that from a travel risk management perspective and the changes that we're seeing, being intentional in travel is important. But I think that I can tell you, I've recently traveled quite extensively in APAC and in Europe, and there is still value in face-to-face meetings with customers and with partners. But the idea, and I think you both brought this up, about being intentional in your travel and being sustainable. So all of this, what we're talking about really is resilience. Is organizational resilience or operational resilience, and how travel risk management or travel planning plays into that dynamic. 70% of CEOs today are requiring resilience to be a board level discussion. And part of that resilience is the ability for organizations to effectively manage their business. Oftentimes that includes traveling. There are still a lot of people in the world that are reluctant to travel for a host of different reasons. So part of what you talked about, Mike, and what you talked about, Miriam, is the idea of making that travel safe and effective. And part of that is making sure that they're aware of the current, and I hate to use this term from my old life, but the current threat picture in the world. Right? What does the world really look like today? If I am flying to a specific area in the globe, do I know if it's a stable environment? Do I know what the crime trends are there? Have I provided the awareness to my employees to protect themselves while they're in a travel status? Part of that is the ability to communicate seamlessly with your travelers, and part of that is pre-trip planning that goes into each traveler's itinerary before they actually leave and are wheels up. So I think this is the way that we actually think about the complexity and how we address our travelers in a way that maintains safety and also increases their confidence while they travel. It will eventually come back, but I don't think we're there yet. People are still very, very nervous when they travel, and we need to do as much as we can to relieve that angst so that they are confident and they can conduct the business of the organization in a way that is effective, efficient, and productive.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to phrase it, and a perfect way to kind of summarize the main goal of where we're headed. So on that note, putting a sharper point on it, what does a successful business travel system look like in a company? And maybe Miriam, you can start with that one. Tracy, please feel free to jump in.
No, go ahead, Miriam. That's fine. Yeah.
A successful business travel program is likely one that focuses on information, right, at the right time. We've just talked about a set of risks that a traveler is considering, not only to, in the environment they're going in, but also in risk to the digital assets that they bring with them, the hardware, to their health, to their emotional well-being, and even potentially when we think about travel risk, there's often risk or detriment to the traveler's family, those that they leave behind to look after the house and the children and all the things that need to go on with your personal life, right? So the ability for travelers to make really informed decisions, to help them make the right decisions in booking what they need to book, is huge. And so you see companies like Mike's, like mine, BCD Travel, start to create more automated ways to get the right information to the traveler at the right point in time, right? So things like a COVID information hub, which is morphing more into, for us at least, more of a general risk information hub, where a traveler can explore what the risks are for any given destination they're going to. Automation to ensure that when travelers are planning to go somewhere where there might be opportunities for additional pre-trip briefings or additional risk or security training for that location, there's automation in place to ensure that when somebody tries to go there, that we catch that and we discuss that trip and help them understand those risks and what they might take. So in general, providing information to that traveler at the right point so that they can be informed to make the right decision is really kind of the pinnacle, right, of a good program when you think about duty of care and travel risk management. And I will say that, when we ask our clients, these are corporations, what their priorities are, traveler duty of care, travel risk management is the number one every single time. It's not new because of COVID-19. It has been their top priority for probably a couple decades now. So it's something that everyone, it's why we have this call. It's why folks like Tracy are in business, right? This is the top priority of corporations, to ensure that travelers feel safe, know what they need to do. And again, it's not just about their physical safety. It's also about the security of those assets that they bring along, like cell phones and computers. Travelers also have a new risk aversion around cybersecurity. This is something that has come up a lot in the last few years, because all of a sudden we had office workers taking brand new laptops home and not necessarily being clear about the security aspects of the physical assets they have. So that's a huge emerging space for travel programs to really make sure that these employees understand not only the risk to them, but the risk to the company in terms of data and access, and the risk to the company's reputation should something go wrong.
I think, Miriam, I can't help myself, but the convergence of digital and physical risk is what you're talking about. So social engineering is practiced globally. And that's usually how most cyber attacks are facilitated. It's through people. And sometimes folks tend to disregard their own cyber hygiene. And I think it's important to notice that there are certain countries in this world where as soon as you enter their airspace, the chances are that your device has been compromised. So what I would say, when you think about how you design a travel risk management program or a travel program for your company, it's to be integrated with your security operations center so that you have a more holistic view of what potential disruptions, risks, or vulnerabilities are, when they're going to manifest, and how you can mitigate the significance of those in a travel status. It's really important that we don't segregate or silo travel risk management away from corporate security and the overall well-being of the employee. Every company will tell you that their number one asset is their people. And in order for us to protect their people, we have to first leverage technology, but technology that's leveraged without trust is ineffective and inefficient. So establishing trust with our employees, letting them know that we're going to leverage technology to help keep them safe, not to be some sort of weird big brother. It's really with their best interest in mind. And I think part of that is through active communication, and part of that is through transparency. So trust, transparency, and technology are really how we actually enable our employees to be safe while they're in travel status. But that safety actually extends beyond travel to their everyday life, with the convergence of the digital and physical risks that they are facing globally. This is an area where we can actually help to inform our employees of potential threats without being portrayed as catastrophic doomsayers. We want to say it in a way that educates them and makes them aware of the threat without putting so much fear into their vocabulary that they won't travel. So I think that's our job as security or travel risk management professionals, is to look at that from the customer's perspective, from the traveler's perspective, and say, what do I need to be safe, effective, and efficient during my travels?
That's real. You used a term, Tracy. I loved cyber hygiene. I hadn't heard that before. I mean, that's really good. And I think not being the creepy big brother, as you described, but actually building the trust with the employee that says, we're trying to look out for you. We want to help you and help your family and make sure you're safe en route, and getting into foreign airspace and your device is compromised. I mean, that's a really good point. Cyber hygiene. I'm going to start using that.
It's huge, Mike, because there are apps available on phones that allow you to have instant connectivity with your employees. However, if the company misuses those apps, then that trust is lost. Once you lose that trust, you'll never get that back. So being a responsible user of technology, if you think about the idea that You can actually reach out to an employee anywhere in the world and advise them of a potential disruption on their phone at any time. You're hard pressed to find somebody in this world that does not use a smartphone, and especially if they're a corporate traveler. So I think that's where that trust and technology really goes together to protect our folks.
Sure.
And I'll add to that real quick. We ask our travelers on a regular basis, right, what they want, what they need. And we recently spoke with them about what they're looking for in travel risk management. And the types of things you speak about, Tracy, are exactly what travelers in business travel want. They want communication. They want notifications on their phones when things happen so that they stay informed. They like the idea of pre-trip destination briefings, whether they be in paper or whether they be in person, depending on the kind of the nature of the location. This is what they're asking for. They want a single button to push on their phone if something goes wrong. That's what they're telling us, and they're telling us in statistically relevant numbers, right, where we know this is exactly what they're looking for. Some of the things that figure farther down on what they're looking for, in fact, they're not that interested, is they don't want to be tracked via their phone. They're not looking for that kind of constant tracking. Some of them are interested in certain circumstances or certain locations or certain times of day where they think tracking would be acceptable. But for the most part, they're looking for that proactive communication. And another area, right, that falls in this is around well-being, right? So there's safety and then there's well-being. And when we ask our travelers, you might find this interesting, what they are looking for the most as it relates to their well-being while they're traveling, the number one answer, and it wasn't even close, is advice and resources on how to eat healthy while they're traveling. They're not looking for mental health support. They're not looking for necessarily meditation apps. They're not looking for counseling or that type of thing. They really want that physical well-being, and they need help figuring out where to have dinner. I was really surprised by those results, right? I mean, it's all about physical well-being, and they're just dying to know where they can get a dinner that isn't full of, nasty stuff. So just a little trivia for you guys, that you can find a way to help direct people to healthy eating. They would greatly appreciate it.
But you know what, Marianne, you talked about the ability to not be tracked. So, and just so you know, I didn't pay Miriam to say that. But one of the things that I like about what we do, as an example, is we have what we call implicit location services. So if we put together a polygon where there's a bridge that's collapsed somewhere in the world, if a traveler enters that polygon, they'll be notified. It doesn't tell us exactly where that person is. It just tells us that they're within that polygon. That gives them situational awareness so that they can avoid that disruption. They may not be in physical danger from the bridge collapse, but it may be on their way to the airport and they need to reroute. Those are the types of things that technology enables us to do. If you had an app that would allow you to do a single push for a danger event, right? So obviously we have that at Everbridge. It's one of our key offerings. But think about the availability of that goes back to your global operations center at the same time. Because sometimes, depending on where you are in the world, you may not want that to go to the local police department. That may actually be part of the problem, unfortunately. So you decide where you want your emergency notification to go. Maybe it is to your security operations center somewhere else in the world that automatically avails themselves to help you extricate yourself from a dangerous situation. That's where when you talk about travel risk management program, that's what I would love to see every company do, so that their employees feel safe, connected, and protected while they travel.
That's great. And Miriam had started touching on the employee view. So I'd love to hear from you all. What is the duty of care owed to employees who are traveling on behalf of their employers?
Actually,
and Mike, would you like to lead us off with this one? Oh.
No, I was going to say, I don't think it's just when they're traveling. Because Kathleen brought up the point that, Miriam brought up the point of it's work from anywhere. So while we have a hybrid workforce, they're not necessarily at home. They could be in Barbados, or they could be somewhere else in the world working. So that duty of care extends not only to the traveling employee, but to the remote employee and to the lone working employee. All of those things are important for us. So I apologize, Mike, I kind of cut you off. I apologize for that.
No. I'm glad you brought that up because it isn't just about travel anymore. It's about the employee working in a remote location and changing that remote location as frequently as they want, quite frankly. So having a corporate policy in place, using Everbridge that would create a safety net for all aspects. I love the Polygon idea of, we're not tracking where you're at specifically, but within this general area, it's going to affect you. So we're going to let you know. I think it's probably more important than ever. Everything that Tracy and Miriam have just discussed, that with remote workers and no corporate headquarters, if you will. We currently operate our entire company, which is 57 employees, but we don't have a physical office. Before pandemic, we had 6. Now we have none. So it's a whole different mindset. And then how do you do the structure, everything that Tracy mentions? It's tricky. So it's a lot to think about, but it's also a really important thing to think about.
Yep. Oh, please do, Miriam.
I'll pick up on the geofencing kind of discussion. This is fancy stuff, right? To some travel programs, right? Companies like Everbridge are making it really easy to implement these types of things. But the idea of geofencing, right, meaning that you pick a part of the earth, and if somebody wanders into that part of the earth, bells start to ring and lights turn red and potentially messaging goes out or whatever. That's been something pretty common in some industries, right? So if you're in resources, marine type industry, right, this is probably something you've already experienced. If you're in aerospace and defense, it's probably something that you've been looking at or experiencing already. So that is something really interesting. I want to pick up on the people risk management piece. That is, there's no mistake that I said people risk management. There is this discussion going on now in corporations about we have travel risk management for people traveling. But if I travel to Atlanta and one of my colleagues who lives in Atlanta is picking me up and there is a terrorist attack on the MARTA, which is Atlanta's public transportation system, I get an immediate notification and I am immediately rerouting in another direction. My friend who lives in Atlanta, my colleague who lives in Atlanta, is still on her way to the MARTA station, right? Unless she's got the news on or is paying attention to other areas, right? So companies are starting to look at, well, we have got people all over the place, and what is my responsibility to my employees, regardless of whether they're technically on what we used to call and are going to call a business trip, or whether they are just living their lives doing work for this company in another location that they live in today. And so the idea of people risk management is starting to come up. And what's exciting, I think, for travel management is it really gives TMCs, folks like Everbridge, and individual travel managers, right, who make a living running programs at companies, it allows them to sort of step into the sunlight because corporations are looking around saying, well, who in our company knows how to keep track of where people are? Who in our company knows how to message people really fast about emerging issues happening? Who in our company knows and is staffed to receive requests from the field for people who might be in distress or need more information or need assistance of some kind? Well, the travel group does that. They do that right now. They have been since pretty much 9/11 and before. They've been addressing this exact situation. And so now companies are taking a look at this and saying, well, can we expand the scope of how we do this to all employees because it's worth it? And so I think it's a really exciting time for this category, for professionals in this category to start reaching across the aisle in different parts of their organization and start adding value in an area that they've got expertise.
And the note about people risk management really hones in on the point that employees do care about a multitude of things. It's not just about safety. It's like you said, it's anything from mental health to what they're eating and the physical health. And there's so many new considerations also, as you mentioned earlier, when you bring in the dimension of the remote workers. So I think that this does add more layers of complexity to the question of what do employees care about, and what are they looking for, and what can they get from these travel risk management companies and groups that work within this space. Are there any other things, beyond the questions of trust and safety, that you've seen employees and employers care about more in this new phase of post-pandemic business travel?
So I think one of the things that so talent is becoming very difficult to obtain and retain. So from an employer perspective, the idea, and Miriam, you really hit on it. You called it people risk management. I like to refer to it as people resilience. I was in India recently, and I was at an ACES event, and one of the speakers there said that, traditionally people make resilient organizations. And he said that's wrong. It's resilient people that make resilient organizations. And he's absolutely spot on. And part of that resilience is the understanding that the organization that they work for cares about their well-being, even if it's something as simple as where do I eat to have a nutritious meal that's not going to slow me down. Right. So I think that the nature and the understanding of duty of care is changing to be more inclusive than it was in the past. So from an employer perspective, one of the things is, how do we retain talent? How do we retain talent in our organizations in a model that is still relatively new? It used to be very easy. You would have functions at the office where people would participate in, and they would develop the culture of the company. That's actually changing. So when you do go to the office, it has to be intentional. And if you're like Mike, you don't have an office, then you have to find a location that is meaningful to the employees so that they want to go. So part of retention, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses, right? We've all heard that. Part of being a good boss is to understand from the employee's perspective what it is that they're challenged with. And if we're asking them to get on an airplane and travel halfway around the world on a day's notice, what's going to happen if they don't have to do that someplace else? So that goes back to, Marion, to what you were talking about, where purposeful travel, intentional destinations, understanding the requirements of the employee, and making sure that they are comfortable in that travel status, because it's no longer required if you are in Seattle that you live in Seattle to work for the company. You can live in a low cost of living area, contribute exponentially to the growth of that company. The problem is you may not generate the same type of cultural identity with the company. So part of that is intentional travel, destination specific, and making sure that you take into consideration how you retain talent as your company grows. Part of that is how that company travels and how they treat their traveling employees. So from my perspective, we're a little bit bigger than you, Mike. We're at about 2,000 employees. So, but we all face the same challenges. If you get a good employee, you want to make sure that that employee understands that the value they bring is recognized by leadership in the organization. And that's huge. And I think that's where treating traveling employees very special adds tremendous value to the retention capabilities of a company.
Well said. But also, Tracy, I think we have had to recognize the different age dynamics when it comes to travel, period. Some of the road warriors of the past would rather they could do a virtual setup, or they could do something quick, or not take a trip. I mean, they're all over it. Where I've got some Gen Z travelers that employees that if I asked them to fly to Canada to pick up an envelope and come back, they would go in a heartbeat, and they'd have not only dinner reservations set up, but it'd be an early dinner, a late dinner, and cocktails in between. and the reservations that all hit my calendar. That recently happened, and I thought, oh my goodness, and they really value the experience behind travel, and keeping them safe and everything we're talking about is really key. Not something I'd considered before.
So prior to the pandemic, during the interview process, the recruiting process, it was not uncommon for a candidate to request a copy of the travel policy if they were considering more than one job. And that was not at all uncommon. And I think now, post-pandemic, we're going to see a lot more of that, right? Where employees, when they're choosing among more than one job, they're going to choose the job that provides them the best benefits as it relates to business travel. I think also with all of this remote work, we start hearing statements from travel managers. There's been several of them, several vocal and large corporate programs who've said this, that with the amount of remote workers that they have today, they believe the travel program is the backbone to the culture of the company, because they are now scheduling quarterly meetings where disparate teams around the world are coming together for multiple days to have what would normally happen or occur right in the lunchroom in a building somewhere, right? So we also see a trend with some meetings and events where there is more demand for resort style locations versus real hardcore city center kind of, you got a room and you got your free breakfast and then you go to your meeting, right? We're seeing a growth of more resort desire, again, for the same reason, where folks are looking at, well, if we all live all over the world, how do we bring a team together to partner, to collaborate, to work together, and to have that, virtual is great until you look in the camera and behind the person you're talking to, your competitor is walking by with a cup of coffee, right? And that's kind of the thing, right? Yeah. And that's what we think about now, right? Virtual can replace a lot until you see you're missing out on something, or you see there's a detriment to culture. And we see travel programs starting to pick up the slack for some of that now. I think it's going to be really interesting how this plays out.
Do you think that actually means that the opportunities for the travel program expand? And by that I say the pandemic elevated resilience. Is there an opportunity there to also reshape the travel program so that it is a bigger player, like you said, for the culture of the company? Because I think you've hit on something here that is very, very relevant, and that is, how do we take something bad like the pandemic and turn it into something good by bringing in maybe new skill sets and new values into travel management that would benefit the company and be more inclusive and centered around the culture of the company? I wonder if there's an opportunity there to sort of morph the travel program into something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now. You think about some of the digital companies, right? I don't want to support any stereotypes, but let's take some of those digital younger companies that are on the West Coast that no longer have anybody reporting into the office. They are still looking for the culture. Culture in a corporation is usually one of the most important things about working there. And a lot of that was nurtured on site, on campus, wherever you might be. And so absolutely, I think that it's a really interesting proposition for travel managers going forward. And how do they set up policies that support the culture? How do they help business leaders within their organization understand the impacts? And how you can alleviate some of the drawbacks of being completely virtual with unique types of trips or unique ways to collaborate or get together. So I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to see very much a change in the sensibilities of the way folks are thinking, especially for companies that continue to stay completely virtual.
Cool. And I know something we haven't touched on in this conversation quite yet, but on that note, what is the role of corporate travel policies, and what should the role of travel corporate policies be? And have you seen them become more important since the pandemic?
I think they're imperative and very important, but the most important part of that is the word policy always makes has a negative connotation. It's, oh, here's the rules. But if it's presented as, this is to keep you safe, this is to enhance your experience, this is to make things better because we care about you. I mean, that in a virtual environment, that's what we're trying to instill and build the culture around is how do we make you feel valued and really mean it? And so I'm sure Tracy's got a better word than policy. Cyber hygiene, don't call on that. But I like the importance of it is huge, but not that the policy. You just don't want it to be a reprimand or a negative because they'll go someplace else.
You know what, Mike, though, I think it's an opportunity to tie it to the strategic vision of the company, right? So companies hire smart people. And so we should treat people as if they're smart by explaining what the corporate strategy is and weaving in how our travel program fits into that strategy by being intentional, by being purposeful, by being sustainable, right? Because all of this is going to manifest in the next several years. You're already seeing it with the whole ESG move, right? So thinking about that from a corporate strategy perspective and weaving that into the vision of the company so that an employee will think twice before they say, I'm going to take a trip that's not necessary, as opposed to saying, I'm going to do this because this is a responsible thing to do. I know that my company is looking out for my best interests. I know that it's looking out for the world's best interest by being environmentally sensitive. So all of those things, I think if we do that and make it more inclusive, that allows us to actually put together a travel program that actually reinforces the values of the organization by practicing the vision and strategy that we've all collectively decided as a company. So a little lofty maybe, but I think if we do that, then people understand. It's not just frivolous travel. It's not, you're not on your own when you're out of the office. Company's got your back, so to speak. But in return, you have to be responsible as well. And I think if you articulate it that way, then it resonates with the employee regardless of where they are in their career journey.
A few things I'll say on travel policy. And one of the important things about a travel policy is that it helps your executives, your business leaders, your division leaders have an expectation and an understanding of how the travel program is going to unfold. Right. And so that's often useful for them to be able to forecast their costs and understand how their employees and their division or whatever, part of the company they're responsible for, what their employees are likely to do, how are they likely to behave, and what the controls in place are in the company to ensure that behavior stays consistent. I think there's also, there's this notion that travel policies need to potentially be global. And that's not possible, right? There are cultural differences around the world. So while, and there are all sorts of differences, right? Not just cultural, but, there's often this idea of like, oh, well, this company operates in, 40 countries and they have a million different policies. Well, that's something you should expect. You should expect that a policy would be nuanced enough to incorporate the differences around the world, not just culturally, but economically, right? There's all sorts of variations in policy, and that's something that companies need to come to terms with. I think TMCs like us are pretty well equipped to be able to deal with the differences and nuances around the world, depending on what you need to do. I think also, when we talk about satisfaction is often like customer satisfaction, traveler satisfaction. Satisfaction is often a function of misaligning what you expect versus what you get. So once again, a travel policy is a really great way of setting expectations of service and the type of experience you're going to have traveling on behalf of the company. And if you set those expectations properly, then when you deliver, you're going to have a satisfied traveler. And one last point about policy. And I used to be a travel manager for a long time. So I used to have to manage a policy myself. The idea of a 40-page policy, right, is ludicrous in 2022. Creating a policy that's concise, that's very clear, that's easily accessible, but more importantly, a policy that weaves itself into the consideration of a business trip, the actual booking of a business trip, the expensing of a business trip, that communication that happens throughout the life cycle of a business trip, right? Policy should appear at a decision point, and it should be ambient to the user, should be ambient to the traveler, right? They shouldn't have to look for a document and look at that section of the document to figure out whether or not they're allowed to fly business class on trips over 6 hours or not. So weaving that policy into process, into automation, into communication at the right time, that's really kind of the gold standard of corporate travel policies.
Excellent. And in our last few minutes here, I know we've talked a lot during this conversation here about making sure travel is purposeful, using these technology-driven innovations to give real-time updates, real-time communication, and starting to think about questions about sustainability and inclusivity when we're thinking about corporate travel. But I'd love to hear from you all. What do you think the future of corporate travel programs look like? And how are these new aspects going to be embedded? Will they be embedded further? And essentially, what's the vision and what's the future of corporate travel programs?
You want us to spin the crystal ball.
Precisely.
The crystal ball, I think, will be a more complex setup with everything we've discussed with the virtual, remote people all over the world. So more complex, but the need for simplicity in terms of understanding and making sure, to Miriam's point, that it's not 44 pages, it's concise, but yet it's more robust and more inclusive than ever before. And that's already coming, but it'll continue that direction.
So we're a tech company, right? So the back end will be incredibly complex, but the user interface needs to be simplified. And it needs to be tied inexorably to your overall approach to duty of care. So you can't separate travel program from employee safety and employee well-being. All of that is connected. There's a connective tissue between all of that that demonstrates the company's ability to care for their employees. On the front end of the system, it has to be very intuitive. Otherwise, employees will not use it. We have very tech-savvy people in the world today. They need to be able to use that technology just like they use their phone. It's intuitive, and if it's not, they're not going to use it. So the onus is on the engineers on the back end, with the idea that your customer experience will be incredibly simplistic and easy for them to navigate.
I agree with what my colleague said. I will say that one of the things we notice with business travelers and even with business leaders is the element of choice is really important. Choosing to travel, choosing how they travel, choosing when they travel, or choosing not to travel at all for whatever reason that might be, whether they are caring for an aging parent at home or they have young children they need to look after, or right, whatever that issue is in their life, right? That element of choice and information is really, really important. I do also want to say, we've been talking about, using all these words, duty of care and policy and whatever, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? And like I mentioned earlier, if you're a salesperson and you're doing a best and final presentation on a virtual screen like this, and you look behind the person and you see one of your competitors fixing themselves a cup of coffee because they decided to show up in person, you're going to see a problem. I personally want to see my team and look them in the eyes, and I want to take them to a nice dinner, and I want to thank them for working so hard over the last few years and sticking with all of this and giving everything they have to this, well, part of what they have, right, to their job. And that never goes away, right? And I know it sounds really cliche, but the idea of shaking a hand, of looking someone in the eye, thanking them for the business, for their work, taking them to dinner, breaking bread, these are all real cliche, old-fashioned ways, but it still means something. And so I think we're going to continue to see this kind of human connection really be important to business travelers. They're going to want to get to see their partners, their clients. I also will say one more thing. One of the things that's held back some of the business travel, comeback this summer has been capacity issues. And there just frankly haven't been seats on planes in airplanes right up in the air to even get business travelers to where they need to go necessarily. And the demand has primarily been driven by the leisure segment, right? We do think that this fall, that leisure kind of pressure might taper off a little bit, right at the same time, all the airlines and hotels are finally getting up to proper staffing and capacity, maybe fuel prices coming down. So there might be a really interesting phase here where the business traveler will start getting more access to capacity. Prices might come down a little bit. It's been a while since many business travelers have visited their partners and clients. So there might be a little bit of a rush here coming in the fall or early part of next year as that leisure demand drops off. The airlines have to fill seats, drop more attractive pricing. Hotels maybe drop more attractive pricing in the mix. And business travelers are really coming out and saying, it's time to go. It's time to have dinner with my customer. So I see it's all really positive.
Agreed.
And that's a great reminder of the reason why we travel and some of the real value of those face-to-face interactions that, regardless of any new trends or new risks or new considerations, there's always that core value of having a true, breaking bread moment, the face-to-face interactions. And there's a real purpose to all of this. And I think that's a great way to wrap it up with reminding us why we travel and the value of it. In our last few minutes, do we have any parting shots from any of you all or any kind of final comments to put a pin in this discussion?
You can all imagine how difficult it is on me to be surrounded by such smart people. You guys, it was very, very good. Very good.
It was it was a great conversation. And I think that if we leave this, it's kind of what Miriam said. Travel is coming back. I can tell you I have traveled extensively over the last year. Airplanes are really, really full. Airports are very, very crowded. Risks are very, very real. Think about those things when you think about how you protect your employees while they're in travel status. There is an expectation, and it's our job to make sure that we look out for the best interests of our employees by making sure we have a good travel policy and that it's integrated with your security ops team so that they can be protected wherever they are in the world. Technology, trust, without the two, you will not be successful.
And if there's any way for folks to comment on this, I would love to hear people's recommendations on healthy meals at airports around the world.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for a great conversation. I feel like we could spend another hour picking each other's brains, but I really appreciate this great conversation. And thank you to Everbridge for sponsoring. And it's been great to meet you all and chat with you all and understand the nuance and complexities behind this new era of business travel. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.